This moment is not random. It is not accidental. It is not something you simply happened to stumble into while scrolling, searching, or passing time. There are moments in life that feel ordinary on the surface, but are heavy with intention beneath it. And this is one of those moments. Something has already been set in motion before you became aware of it. The fact that you are here, listening, reading, receiving, is evidence that timing is at work. Not human timing, not coincidence. Divine timing. This is not an encouraging message meant to make you feel temporarily better. It is an interruption. It breaks into your normal flow, your assumptions, your inner narratives, and it demands your attention because what is unfolding now cannot wait for later. There are seasons when comfort is appropriate, when reassurance is enough to steady the heart. This is not one of those seasons. This is a threshold moment, a crossing, a line drawn between what has been and what can no longer remain the same. You were not meant to simply be soothed here. You were meant to be awakened. Something is being addressed in you that has been dormant, postponed, or buried under layers of disappointment, fatigue, and adaptation. This message does not arrive to applaud survival. It arrives to announce transition. What is being initiated now is not a minor adjustment or a gradual improvement. It is a reset, complete, comprehensive, not only forward-facing but backward-reaching. This challenges how most people understand God, time, and personal history. We are taught to believe the past is fixed, mistakes are permanent markers, and regret must be carried as a lifelong weight. But this moment declares something radically different. God is not only rewriting what comes next, He is reinterpreting what came before. The past you thought defined you is not being denied, but it is being reordered. Its meaning is being rewritten. Its authority over you is being revoked. This kind of reset disrupts conventional thinking. It confronts the belief that damage is final, that detours cancel destiny, that lost years are gone forever. You may have learned to live with regret, to manage disappointment, to accommodate shame as if it were a permanent resident. You may have built an identity around what went wrong, what you missed, what you became because circumstances forced you to adapt. This moment interrupts that entire framework. It announces that what you assumed was permanent was provisional. What you believed was defining was temporary. What you thought disqualified you was never authorized to do so. You are not here because you earned this moment through perfection or consistency. You are here because you were chosen for restoration. That word matters. Chosen does not mean superior. It means selected for responsibility. It means there is something in your life that still matters enough to heaven that intervention was necessary. Resets are not issued to lives that are finished. They are released to lives that still carry assignment. If you were done, this moment would not exist. The fact that it does is proof that your story is not over, and, more importantly, that it is not settled in the way you thought it was. Before trauma touched you, before failure shaped your decisions, before interference altered your direction, there was an original design, a blueprint, something intentional, coherent, and whole. That design did not disappear when life became complicated. It was not destroyed by bad choices, painful relationships, or seasons of confusion. It was covered, buried beneath layers of coping, fear, and distortion. This message introduces that truth not to shame you for straying, but to remind you that what is original can still be restored. A blueprint is not improvised. It exists before construction begins. And even when a building is damaged, The blueprint remains the reference point for restoration. God is not guessing about your life. He is not reacting to your mistakes. He is returning you to what He already authored. That means the reset happening now is not experimental. It is precise. It is intentional. It is aligned with something that existed long before your worst moments. Transformation does not begin when circumstances change. It begins when alignment shifts. And alignment is shifting now. The moment you receive this message, something internal starts to reorganize. You may not feel fireworks, you may not see immediate external evidence, but movement has already begun. The reset does not wait for your full understanding. It initiates the moment consent is given, the moment your spirit recognizes truth, the moment resistance loosens its grip. This is why this moment carries urgency, not because you are about to miss out on something external, but because neutrality is no longer an option. Once truth is revealed, you cannot return to unawareness. Once alignment begins, stagnation becomes uncomfortable. This is a point of no return, not because you are being forced forward, but because staying the same will no longer fit. What you hear here will rearrange how you interpret your life. Old narratives will begin to collapse. Explanations you relied on will lose their power. You will not be able to unknow what has been revealed. The reset already in motion is irreversible because it is not dependent on your performance. It is authorized. What God initiates does not require your striving to sustain it. Your role is not to make it happen, but to stop resisting what is already happening. Fear may try to convince you that this is too good to be true, that you have failed too much, that time has already passed you by. But fear speaks from a limited view of time. This reset comes from eternity, where nothing is wasted and nothing is beyond repair. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are standing in a moment where the story you thought was fixed is being reopened, revised, and redeemed. This is not encouragement. It is declaration. It is not suggestion. It is announcement. And once it has been heard, life cannot return to neutral. Long before your first memory, before your earliest decision, before anyone spoke expectations over you or projected fear onto your future, there was already a design in place. Not a vague intention, not a hopeful wish, but a deliberate plan. Scripture speaks of this plainly. A life known before it was lived, days written before one of them came to be. This is not poetic exaggeration meant to comfort the wounded. It is a statement of origin. Your life did not begin at birth. It began in intention. You were not an experiment. You were not an afterthought. You were authored. This idea of a pre-designed life plan often feels distant or abstract, especially to those whose lives have been marked by chaos, disruption, or prolonged detours. It can sound unrealistic to someone who looks at their history and sees confusion rather than coherence. But the existence of a blueprint does not depend on the condition of the building. A design can exist even when the structure has been damaged, altered, or partially buried. The plan precedes the process, and nothing that has happened to you has surprised the one who designed you. Deviation, then, must be understood correctly. You may have taken paths you now regret. You may have responded to pain in ways that created more pain. You may have settled for survival instead of purpose for long stretches of time. But deviation does not equal deletion. A wrong turn does not erase a destination. A season of disobedience does not cancel a calling. If that were true, no one in Scripture would have fulfilled their assignment. Moses fled, David failed, Peter denied, Paul persecuted. Yet none of these deviations deleted what was placed inside them before their mistakes. What deviation does is delay visibility, not invalidate design. It introduces layers: fear layered over courage, shame layered over identity, distortion layered over truth. Over time, these layers can become so familiar that you begin to mistake them for who you are. You stop asking who you were meant to be and start managing who you became in response to damage. But response is not essence. Adaptation is not identity. What you learned to do to survive is not the same as what you were created to do to thrive. This is where the concept of corruption must be handled carefully. Corruption does not mean total destruction. It means something pure has been interfered with. Water can be contaminated, but it does not cease to be water. Data can be corrupted, but the original file still exists beneath the damage. In the same way, purpose can be covered, distorted, misdirected, but it is not erased. Corruption affects expression, not existence. What was placed in you at the beginning cannot be removed by circumstance, only obscured by it. Many people live as if their worst decisions rewrote their identity. They speak of themselves using language shaped by failure. I'm just like this. I always mess things up. This is who I've become. But these statements confuse layers with foundations. A foundation is what remains when everything else is stripped away. Layers are what accumulate over time. Beliefs formed in pain, habits developed in fear, defenses built to avoid being hurt again. Layers feel permanent because they've been there a long time. But longevity does not equal legitimacy. Your past mistakes are layers, not definitions. They are chapters, not titles. They explain how you coped, not who you are. Even the patterns that feel deeply ingrained, self-sabotage, mistrust, avoidance, over-control, are responses to environments, not revelations of identity. They formed because something in you was trying to protect itself. But protection is not purpose. Travel mode can keep you alive, but it cannot reveal who you were designed to be. This is why hope is not naive here. It is logical. If something was buried rather than destroyed, it can be uncovered. Burial implies intention, even if that intention was not yours. Seeds are buried before they multiply. Treasures are buried before they are recovered. Even in Scripture, what is hidden is often preserved. Darkness does not automatically mean death. Sometimes it means concealment. Sometimes it means protection until the right season arrives. What was buried in you did not rot. It waited. Waiting does not mean inactive. It means preserved. There are parts of you that were set aside because revealing them too early would have exposed them to damage you were not yet equipped to handle. Innocence was buried to survive. Vision was buried to avoid disappointment. Sensitivity was buried because it was too costly in hostile environments. But burial is not abandonment. It is a strategy for survival until resurrection is possible. This reframing changes how you look at your history. Instead of asking, "What did I ruin?" the question becomes, "What was covered?" Instead of assuming loss, you begin to look for preservation. You stop defining yourself by the moments you fell short and start looking for the thread that never disappeared, only went underground. That thread is your original design. It has been there through every season, even when you couldn't access it. Hope, then, is not about pretending the past didn't hurt. It is about recognizing that hurt did not have the authority to erase what God authored. Healing is not the creation of something new. It is the uncovering of something true. Restoration does not mean becoming someone else. It means returning to what was always there beneath the layers. And that process begins not with striving, but with recognition. You are not starting over from nothing. You are starting again from truth. The life plan established before you were born is not fragile. It is resilient. It has endured confusion, delay, interference, and distortion. And now, in this moment, it is being called back into visibility. What was buried can still be uncovered. What was covered can still be revealed. What was corrupted can still be restored. And what was designed from the beginning is finally ready to emerge. Not everyone receives a reset. That truth may feel unsettling at first, but it is essential to understand if you are going to grasp the weight of what is happening now. Resets are not distributed as comfort prizes, and they are not offered simply because life became difficult. Many people struggle. Many people suffer. Many people drift far from who they were meant to be. Yet, not all of them experience interruption. Not all of them are stopped, confronted, or realigned. A reset is rare because it is purposeful. It is reserved for those whose assignments are unfinished and whose absence from alignment would leave something incomplete. A reset only becomes necessary when destiny itself is at risk. Heaven does not intervene arbitrarily. There is no need to interrupt a life that has already abandoned its assignment, nor one that no longer carries consequence beyond itself. Intervention happens when what is at stake extends beyond personal comfort or success. It happens when a life still holds weight, when what that person carries would affect others, shift environments, or fulfill something that cannot be accomplished through another vessel in the same way. This is why a reset is not evidence of failure, even though it often arrives after seasons that feel like collapse, loss, or disorientation. From a human perspective, it can look like correction or even consequence. But from heaven's perspective, it is preservation. It is not issued because you failed too much. It is released because quitting, settling, or remaining misaligned would cost too much. The reset does not highlight your weakness. It reveals your importance. If you were insignificant to the larger story, there would be no need to stop the trajectory you are on. If your life did not carry assignment, there would be no reason to reorder it. Heaven does not disrupt what does not matter. It does not realign what carries no future weight. The fact that intervention has occurred means your life was never meant to dissolve into obscurity, bitterness, or quiet resignation. Something in you still matters enough to be retrieved. It is also crucial to understand that this reset was not negotiated. You did not convince God to do this through effort, pleading, or spiritual performance. In many cases, people experience a reset when they were too tired, too confused, or too disconnected to even ask for one. That is because this was not human requested. It was heaven initiated. Authority did not come from your desperation. It came from divine intent. This was not a response to your prayers alone, but to your purpose. There are moments when God responds to what we ask, and then there are moments when God responds to what He has spoken. This reset belongs to the second category. It exists because of a word already released over your life, a promise already made, an assignment already authored. Even when you forgot it, even when you doubted it, even when you stopped believing it could still happen, heaven did not revoke it. What God initiates, He remains responsible for completing. Understanding this removes shame from the process. Shame says, "I needed a reset because I messed everything up." Truth says, "A reset came because the story was not allowed to end this way." Shame keeps you looking backward in condemnation. Truth positions you forward in responsibility. The reset is not an eraser meant to wipe you out. It is a recalibration meant to bring you back into alignment with something still ahead of you. Heaven-initiated resets often arrive with disruption because gentle suggestions were ignored or misunderstood. They may come through closed doors, sudden exposure, relationships ending, or inner unrest that refuses to be silenced. These are not punishments. They are alarms. They signal that continuation without correction would have led further away from assignment. Intervention does not mean God was distant before. It means patience reached its limit because delay was no longer safe. Authority is central here. This reset carries weight because it does not rely on your agreement to be valid. You may resist it. You may question it. You may not fully understand it yet. But its legitimacy does not come from your comprehension. It comes from its source. Heaven initiated it. Heaven sustains it. And heaven will complete it. Your role is not to authorize it, but to cooperate with it. When you recognize that this reset is not common, not accidental, and not a reflection of failure, something shifts internally. Gratitude replaces confusion. Responsibility replaces self-pity. Awareness replaces fear. You begin to see that being interrupted is not a sign you were off the map, but that you were too important to be left where you were. And with that realization comes clarity. This moment exists because there is still something you are meant to carry forward. You are not being restarted because you are disposable. You are being realigned because you are necessary. The assignment is not finished. The story is not complete, and heaven has stepped in to ensure that what was written does not remain unfulfilled. Okay, got it. For a long time, you have been living inside a version of yourself that was never meant to be permanent. It was not who you were designed to be. It was who you became in order to survive. Survival demanded adjustments. It demanded silence where there should have been expression, strength where there should have been safety, and vigilance where there should have been rest. Over time, those adjustments hardened into patterns, and those patterns began to masquerade as identity. What you adapted into, you slowly accepted as who you are. But adaptation is not origin. Pain does not have the authority to name you. Rejection does not have the legal right to define you. Trauma may shape behavior, but it does not rewrite design. Yet when experiences repeat themselves long enough, when rejection comes early, when love feels conditional, when safety feels temporary, the mind begins to draw conclusions, not consciously at first, but quietly, deeply. Conclusions like, I am difficult to love, I am always behind, I am too much or not enough, I have to earn my place, I am on my own. These were not lies you chose, they were lies you absorbed. Trauma is not just an event, it is a narrator. And if no stronger voice interrupts it, trauma becomes the storyteller of identity. It explains why you flinch before danger arrives, why you overthink before speaking, why you carry guilt that was never assigned to you, why you measure yourself constantly, as if existence requires justification. But this is where the reset begins. This reset is not self-improvement. It is not mindset training. It is not learning how to cope better with a broken image of yourself. This reset is a revocation of false authority. It is the moment when the names given to you by pain, fear, abandonment, and failure are stripped of their power, and only one voice is allowed to speak again. Scripture says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalm 139:14. This declaration was not written from a life untouched by hardship. It was written from revelation. Revelation of original design. Fearfully and wonderfully is not poetic exaggeration. It is a statement of intention. It means you were formed with precision, purpose, and reverence. You were not assembled casually. You were not improvised. You were designed, and that design still exists. Mistakes did not erase it. Detours did not delete it. Sin did not overwrite it. Trauma did not destroy it. What happened to you did not replace who you are. It only covered it. Layers formed. Layers of fear, shame, self-protection, distortion. But layers are not identity. They are accumulations, and what is layered can be removed. This reset does not add something new to you. It reveals what was always there. For years, you may have identified yourself by what you survived. I'm the strong one. I'm the responsible one. I'm the one who doesn't need help. But those identities were forged in environments where help was unavailable, where strength was demanded prematurely, where vulnerability was unsafe. They were necessary then, but they are insufficient now. Survival identities expire. When God initiates an identity reset, He does not shame the survival version of you. He honors it and then retires it. Because what protected you in scarcity will sabotage you in abundance. What kept you alive in danger will keep you small in safety. This is why the reset feels disorienting at first. You may notice that your old internal voices start losing volume. The constant self-criticism becomes less convincing. The reflexive guilt doesn't land the same way. You still hear the thoughts, but you no longer obey them automatically. There is a pause now, a moment of distance. And in that distance, a new question forms. Who told me this about myself? That question alone dismantles years of false identity. The enemy never needed to destroy you. He only needed to convince you that you were someone else. And for a long time, it worked. Not because you were weak, but because you were wounded. But the reset interrupts the narrative. It exposes the source. And once the source is exposed, the lie collapses. When identity begins to return to its original design, confidence does not explode. It settles. You stop striving to be seen. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating your worth in every room. You don't become louder. You become clearer. You don't become harder. You become grounded. This is evidence of reset. You will notice changes in how you relate to people. Not everyone will feel comfortable with the version of you that no longer needs approval. Relationships built on your insecurity may begin to strain. Dynamics that relied on your self-doubt will feel unstable. Not because you are changing for the worse, but because you are no longer agreeing with who you were told to be. Identity restoration always disrupts false agreements. You will also notice changes internally. You no longer feel the need to prove your value through exhaustion. Productivity loses its grip as a measure of worth. Rest no longer feels like failure. Silence no longer feels like danger. You begin to exist without apology. This does not make you passive. It makes you positioned. A restored identity does not hustle for validation. It moves with authority. Authority does not announce itself. It is recognized. People begin to listen differently, not because you are louder, but because you are aligned. There is weight behind your words now, not emotional intensity, credibility. This is why identity must be reset before influence increases. God does not elevate fractured identity. He restores it first. Because influence magnifies whatever it touches, and the next season of your life requires a self that is anchored in truth, not fear. You cannot steward what is coming if you are still living under names you did not choose. This reset is not a reward for good behavior. It is an intervention. Heaven steps in when distortion has lasted long enough. When purpose is being delayed not by lack of effort, but by false self-perception. When calling is intact, but confidence has been eroded. And that is why this reset was initiated, not requested. You did not earn it. You were selected for it. Not everyone receives a reset. Only those with unfinished assignments. Only those whose purpose is too significant to remain buried under misidentification. The reset is proof of importance, not failure. Heaven does not reset what it has abandoned. It resets what it refuses to lose. As this process continues, you will begin to recognize yourself again. Not the version shaped by survival, but the one beneath it. The one who was curious before fear. The one who trusted before betrayal. The one who moved without constant calculation. You are not going backward. You are being reintroduced. And this reintroduction is irreversible. Once identity returns to its original alignment, you cannot unknow it. You cannot unsee it. Life does not go back to neutral. You may still face challenges, but you will face them as yourself, not as a distorted echo of experience. You are not who rejection said you were. You are not who trauma shaped you into. You are not who failure tried to label. You are not who survival forced you to become. You are who God designed before any of that happened. And that design is not being created. It is being uncovered, layer by layer, lie by lie, until nothing remains but truth. The reset is not coming. It is already happening. Anxiety, fear, and confusion were never defaults in you. They were additions, installed responses, learned reflexes. They feel familiar now, not because they belong to you, but because they were rehearsed under pressure. Repetition created familiarity, and familiarity was mistaken for identity. But what feels normal is not always what is original. Your mind was not designed as a war zone. It was designed as a sanctuary, a place of clarity, a place of order, a place where thought flowed without panic and decision was not governed by dread. Scripture calls it a sound mind, not loud, not frantic, not constantly scanning for threat. Soundness implies stability, integrity, wholeness. That was the original architecture. But somewhere along the way, the sanctuary was invaded. Fear did not knock. Trauma did not ask permission. Anxiety slipped in through moments of shock, betrayal, uncertainty, and prolonged stress. At first, these responses were protective. Hypervigilance kept you alert. Overthinking tried to prevent pain from repeating. Control felt like safety. But what begins as protection can quietly become occupation, and the mind slowly shifted from refuge to battlefield. Thoughts began arguing with each other. Peace became rare. Silence felt unsafe. The moment things slowed down, anxiety filled the space. Your inner world stopped being a place you could rest and became a place you had to manage. This was not because you were weak. It was because you were under siege. The enemy does not need to destroy the mind to derail destiny. He only needs to occupy it. Confusion is one of his most effective tools. Not dramatic chaos, but low-grade mental noise. Endless questions with no resolution. Scenarios that never happen but are constantly rehearsed. Fear that has no face, only volume. Over time, this noise convinces you that peace is unrealistic, clarity is rare, and stability is temporary. But that belief is part of the corruption. This reset addresses the mind directly, Not by suppressing thoughts, not by teaching you how to cope better with anxiety, but by demolishing pathways that were never meant to exist. Scripture is clear. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:7. That verse does not say fear will never knock. It says fear does not originate from God, which means fear is not native to your design. If it is not native, it is removable. Mental strongholds are not demolished by force of will. They are dismantled by truth. Truth interrupts repetition. Truth exposes origin. And once origin is exposed, authority collapses. Anxiety loses power when you realize it is not intuition. Fear weakens when you recognize it is not wisdom. Confusion dissolves when you see it is not complexity, but interference. This reset is restoring the mind to its intended function. You will notice the change not as excitement, but as quiet. Thoughts slow down. Emotional spikes flatten. You begin responding instead of reacting. Situations that once triggered spirals now meet space. That space is not emptiness. It is order returning. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the absence of internal warfare. When the mind resets, peace arrives before circumstances change. This is important. Peace is not a reward for resolved situations. It is evidence that the reset is active. It means your nervous system is no longer interpreting everything as a threat. It means the body is learning that it is safe to be present. It means the mind is returning to governance instead of survival. This does not mean thoughts disappear. It means they no longer dominate. Clarity returns gradually, not as sudden answers to every question, but as the ability to think without panic. Decisions feel cleaner. Timing feels calmer. You stop forcing conclusions. You stop rehearsing disasters. You trust your perception again. This is what it means for the mind to become a sanctuary again. A sanctuary is not loud. It is not frantic. It does not demand constant attention. It allows reflection. It allows stillness. It allows truth to surface without being drowned out by noise. When the mind is restored, you can finally hear yourself think, and more importantly, you can hear God without interference. The reset does not make you passive, it makes you precise. You will notice that discernment sharpens as anxiety fades. Fear clouds judgment. Peace clarifies it. Confusion multiplies options. Soundness simplifies them. You will begin to sense when something is aligned, not because it excites you, but because it does not agitate you. Pressure-driven decisions lose appeal. Urgency loses authority. This is a sign that the reset is not theoretical. It is physiological. Your system is being retrained out of survival mode. The enemy thrived when your mind was constantly bracing for impact, but when peace stabilizes, his access diminishes. He has no leverage when fear is no longer in control. That is why this reset had to begin internally before anything external could shift. You cannot steward clarity with a frantic mind. You cannot handle influence with an anxious nervous system. You cannot carry what is coming while your thoughts are still at war with each other. So God restores the mind first, not by erasing memory, but by removing authority from what memory taught you. Not by denying what happened, but by severing its control. The experiences remain facts, but they no longer dictate function. As this continues, you may notice something subtle but profound. You feel more present, less pulled into the past, less anxious about the future, more anchored in now. That presence is not numbness, it is regulation. It is the mind returning to its original operating system. A sound mind is not dramatic. It is dependable. It does not collapse under pressure. It does not inflate under success. It remains steady. This steadiness is not learned, it is restored. And once the mind remembers peace, it does not forget it. You may still encounter stress, but you will no longer live there. Anxiety may try to speak, but it will no longer narrate. Fear may appear, but it will no longer decide. The battlefield is being cleared, the sanctuary is being reopened, and the quiet you are beginning to feel is not emptiness, it is evidence that the reset is working. For a long time, your calling was not absent, it was obscured, covered rather than cancelled, buried beneath layers of distraction and detours that slowly redirected your energy away from what you were actually designed to do. These detours did not always look wrong or destructive. Many of them appeared responsible, productive, even necessary. That is precisely why they worked. The enemy rarely confronts purpose head-on. He reroutes it quietly, convincing you to invest yourself in paths that look close enough to the truth to keep you moving, but far enough away to keep you misaligned. You stayed busy, you stayed engaged, you stayed useful. Yet, usefulness is not the same as obedience, and movement is not the same as direction. Over time, you were building, but not what you were assigned to build. Running hard, but not in your lane. Spending strength without receiving fulfillment in return. Misplaced effort always produces exhaustion without peace. Counterfeit paths demand urgency. They pressure you to decide quickly, to commit prematurely, to prove yourself before clarity arrives. They appeal to fear of delay, fear of being left behind, fear of wasting time. And in doing so, they drown out the quieter, steadier pull of your true assignment. That pull never disappeared, but it became harder to hear as the noise increased. Slowly, calling began to feel distant, vague, even unrealistic. Not because it was gone, but because it was being crowded out. This reset does not condemn you for the roads you walked. It corrects the direction. God does not shame you for misalignment. He closes it. Closure is not punishment. It is mercy. It stops the bleeding of energy. It ends cycles that were draining you or producing little life. This is why certain projects are losing momentum. Why roles that once consumed you are suddenly releasing their grip. Why opportunities that used to excite you now feel heavy or empty. These are not collapses. They are conclusions. They are not losses. They are releases. Scripture makes this unchanging intention clear. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Not plans discovered late, not plans revised after mistakes, but plans known, established, and preserved. God's plans did not change when you detoured. They waited. Purpose is patient. Calling does not expire because of delay. It remains intact until the internal environment is capable of carrying it without distortion. This reset creates that environment by removing what competes with your assignment. When wrong paths close, the right one does not arrive with chaos or force. It becomes obvious. Clarity emerges not as pressure, but as coherence. You begin to sense direction without anxiety. The next step feels clean, not overwhelming. You are no longer torn between options or pulled in 10 directions at once. Confusion fades because the internal noise quiets. You recognize alignment not because it excites your fear, but because it settles your spirit. This is what restoration looks like. Effort becomes focused. Energy returns. Motivation stabilizes. You stop chasing purpose and start inhabiting it. What you are doing begins to match who you are. And that alignment, quiet, steady, unmistakable, is the evidence that calling is no longer obscured. It is being revealed. Along the way, not every relationship that entered your life was sent to support your destiny. Some were counterfeits, close enough to feel familiar, persuasive enough to feel necessary, but ultimately designed to distract, drain, or delay what you were carrying. These connections did not always arrive with obvious harm. Many came wrapped in affection, opportunity, validation, or shared struggle. That is how derailment works most effectively. It rarely feels like attack. It feels like alignment, until time exposes the cost. These relationships consumed emotional energy, blurred boundaries, reinforced false versions of yourself, or kept you anchored to seasons you were meant to outgrow. They did not destroy your purpose, but they slowed it, fragmented it, and demanded access to parts of you that were meant to remain protected. When those connections began to fade or fracture, it often felt like rejection. Loneliness followed, and with it, the question, what is wrong with me? But heaven was not subtracting out of cruelty. It was making room with precision. Loneliness was not abandonment. It was preparation. It was the clearing of space. Certain voices had to go silent so you could hear yourself again. Certain influences had to leave so your discernment could recalibrate. God will never introduce divinely appointed relationships into a crowded, compromised environment. Separation is not always loss. Sometimes it is sanitation. It removes what contaminates clarity and preserves what is sacred. What felt like isolation was actually containment, a season where your spirit was protected from further distortion while healing and alignment took place. Now the reset moves visibly through your relational world. Toxic ties lose their hold without dramatic confrontation. Misaligned connections drift away without explanation. Conversations no longer flow where they once did. Familiar dynamics feel strained, not because you changed arbitrarily, but because you are no longer compatible with what once fed off your lack of boundaries. This is not cruelty. It is maturity. You are no longer available for relationships that require you to shrink, perform, or stay wounded to be accepted. As these connections exit, peace replaces guilt. Relief replaces obligation. You stop explaining yourself. That is how you know the reset is working. At the same time, divinely appointed relationships begin returning, or appearing for the first time. They arrive without force, without confusion, without games. These connections recognize you rather than consume you. They affirm your becoming instead of competing with it. There is mutual respect, clean communication, and a sense of timing that feels effortless rather than rushed. Some of these people were written into your blueprint long ago, but could not meet you until you were restored to yourself. Others are new, yet strangely familiar, as if your spirit recognizes them before your history does. They do not demand access to your wounds. They meet you from wholeness. These relational shifts are not random social changes. They are markers of reset completion. When relationships realign, it confirms that internal restoration has stabilized. You no longer bond through trauma or tolerate misalignment for the sake of connection. You attract what matches your healed state. Peace becomes the filter. Clarity becomes the standard. And without striving, your relational world begins to resemble the original design. Clean, supportive, purposeful. That is how you know the reset is not theoretical anymore. It is manifest. Financial struggle was never your inheritance. It may have followed you for years, shaped your decisions, and influenced how you measured safety, but it was never written into your original design. What you experienced was interference, not intention. Somewhere along the way, access was obstructed. Flow was restricted. Patterns formed that taught you to brace instead of expect, to conserve instead of create, to survive instead of steward. But survival mode is not a virtue when it outlives its assignment. It is evidence that something external disrupted what was meant to move freely. Heaven never authored lack as a defining feature of your life. Scarcity was not a lesson you were meant to master. It was a condition you were meant to outgrow. Much of what you called normal was actually blockage. Delayed payments, missed opportunities, cycles where money arrived only to disappear under pressure. Generational scripts that framed struggle as humility and abundance as danger. These were not moral tests. They were interruptions. Curses do not always announce themselves as darkness. They often disguise themselves as responsibility, realism, or resignation. Over time, you learned to function inside limitation so consistently that it began to feel like identity. But heaven does not confuse endurance with destiny. What interfered with your provision never replaced your blueprint, it only covered it. And what covers can be removed. Now those blocks are being addressed at the root. Not merely symptoms, but systems. Not just income, but internal agreements. Survival patterns, hoarding, overworking, undercharging, mistrusting rest, fearing overflow are being dismantled. These habits once kept you alive, but they cannot keep you aligned. They were appropriate for lack, not for increase. As the reset moves forward, what sustains scarcity loses its authority. The pressure to constantly calculate every outcome begins to ease. The anxiety that once accompanied every expense starts to loosen. You are not becoming careless, you are becoming regulated. Provision flows best through a nervous system that is not constantly bracing for loss. Abundance is not a reward for faithfulness. It is a feature of alignment. It was part of the original design long before fear attached conditions to it. Abundance does not mean excess without wisdom. It means sufficiency without strain. It means margin. It means the ability to respond instead of react. When God restores provision, He restores it holistically. Clarity in decision-making, discernment in opportunity, patience in timing, and confidence in value. You stop chasing money and start recognizing pathways. You no longer accept compensation that contradicts your worth. You no longer confuse exhaustion with productivity. That is not laziness. It is stewardship, returning to its proper place. As this restoration unfolds, provision does not always arrive loudly. Often it comes quietly, almost casually, in ways that feel too simple to be divine. An idea that lands with peace instead of pressure. A conversation that opens a door you stopped knocking on years ago. A resource that appears without desperation attached. An unexpected credit, refund, invitation, or alignment that bypasses your usual struggle. These are not coincidences. They are indicators, evidence that flow has resumed. Heaven does not always announce restoration with spectacle. Sometimes it proves it through ease. When what once required effort now requires consent, you are witnessing reset in motion. Opportunities begin to recognize you rather than the other way around. You notice timing improving, less wasted motion, fewer dead ends. You spend less energy recovering from financial hits because fewer are landing. Decisions feel cleaner. There is less emotional charge around money because it is no longer carrying your sense of safety or self-worth. You begin to plan from peace instead of panic. Budgeting shifts from fear-based restriction to intentional direction. Giving becomes thoughtful, not guilt-driven. Receiving becomes natural, not shameful. This is how abundance stabilizes, not through excess, but through right relationship. Most importantly, your identity is separating from scarcity. You are no longer defining yourself by what you lack, what you owe, or what you fear losing. Money stops being proof of value or threat to stability and becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool that serves purpose. You understand now that poverty was never humility, and wealth is not corruption. Both are conditions that reveal alignment or misalignment. When identity is anchored in God, provision becomes flexible. You can hold it without worshiping it and release it without fearing collapse. That freedom is the true sign of restoration. The reset does not promise instant riches. It promises restored flow. It does not remove responsibility. It removes futility. You will still work, but without striving. You will still plan, but without obsession.
You will still give, but without depletion. And as these changes settle, you will look back and realize something profound. The struggle that once defined your financial life no longer has language for your present. What interfered has been interrupted. What was blocked is moving. What was covered is being revealed. And abundance, quiet, stable, purposeful, is reclaiming its place as part of your original design. Grief over lost years is one of the quietest burdens you have carried. It does not always announce itself as sadness. Often it hides as resignation, as the dull ache that whispers, "If only I had known sooner," or "If only I had not taken that turn." You replay seasons in your mind and measure what might have been if time had moved differently, if decisions had been clearer, if interference had not stolen momentum. This grief is real and it has weight, but it is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that you were meant for more than what delay allowed. Heaven does not dismiss this grief, yet it does not agree with its conclusions. God does not look at your timeline and see waste. He sees material for redemption. Scripture speaks directly into this ache with authority, not sentiment. "I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten," is not poetry meant to soothe regret. It is a declaration of jurisdiction. It establishes that time itself is subject to God's command. The locusts did not merely consume resources, they consumed seasons, momentum, and opportunity. And yet God does not promise to simply give you more years to compensate. He promises restoration. That distinction matters. Restoration does not mean repeating the past or stretching the future longer than planned. It means reclaiming what was lost and reintegrating it into what remains with multiplied effect. Divine acceleration is how this happens. When God redeems time, He does not operate within linear compensation. He compresses outcomes. He causes clarity to arrive faster than confusion ever did. He brings convergence where there was fragmentation. What once required years of trial and error now unfolds through discernment and alignment. This is not rushing, it is precision. Acceleration does not feel chaotic when it is divine. It feels inevitable. Suddenly, things begin to move that were stalled for years. Conversations open doors that effort never could. Decisions that once felt overwhelming become obvious. Progress that should have taken seasons begins to stack in weeks. Compressed timelines are not about speed for its own sake. They are about recovery of assignment. God accelerates when delay has already done its refining work. You are not being hurried because you are behind. You are being advanced because you are ready. The years you mourn were not empty. They built capacity, discernment, and depth that now allow acceleration without collapse. Without that formation, speed would have destroyed you. With it, speed becomes sustainable. This is why restoration comes suddenly after long silence. The silence was not absence. It was preparation for compression. You will notice this acceleration not as frantic activity, but as momentum with minimal resistance. What once took relentless effort now responds to alignment. There is less friction, fewer setbacks, and more continuity. You begin to accomplish in months what once felt impossible in years. Not because you are working harder, but because you are no longer working against timing. Heaven is now cooperating openly with your steps. When God redeems time, He restores access. Things recognize you. Opportunities align without coercion. Support arrives without pleading. This is not luck. It is redeemed sequence. Sudden progress is one of the clearest supernatural signs that restoration is active. It does not always announce itself with spectacle, but it is unmistakable. You look back and realize that stagnation has quietly disappeared. The heaviness tied to starting over is gone, because you are not starting over. You are continuing from a higher vantage point. God does not erase your history. He repurposes it. The wisdom gained through delay now fuels acceleration. What you learned the hard way becomes the reason you move quickly now. Nothing is wasted in the economy of redemption. Most importantly, this restoration heals your relationship with time itself. You stop living as though you are late. You stop making decisions out of panic, trying to catch up. Peace enters your sense of timing. You no longer measure your life against others' timelines because you recognize that yours has been sovereignly recalibrated. When God redeems time, urgency loses its grip and purpose gains clarity. You are no longer haunted by what is gone because you can sense what is arriving, and it carries more weight than what was lost. This is the holy reversal. Grief gives way to gratitude. Not because the pain was imaginary, but because the outcome is greater. The years that felt wasted become witnesses to restoration. Acceleration does not deny your past, it vindicates it. And as progress begins to compound, you will understand that God did not simply give you back time, He redeemed it. What remains will carry the fullness of what was stolen, restored with precision, power, and unmistakable grace. After a reset, opposition does not disappear, it changes strategy. The enemy rarely challenges what is still broken. Resistance intensifies only when something has been restored. This is why doubt often surfaces not during collapse, but immediately after clarity, peace, or momentum begins to return. You may notice intrusive thoughts questioning whether the reset was real, whether change will last, or whether you are truly different now. This is not coincidence. It is reaction. When God resets a life, the enemy's primary tactic is not to stop the reset, but to convince you it never happened. One of the most common strategies used in this post-reset season is the reminder of past failure. Old memories resurface without invitation. Mistakes you thought were settled replay in sharper detail. Accusations return disguised as wisdom or realism, suggesting that history will repeat itself, that you are only temporarily stable, or that you will eventually revert. These thoughts are not reflections. They are attempts to reattach identity to a version of you that no longer exists. The enemy traffics in familiarity. He knows that if he can pull your attention backward, he can weaken your confidence forward. But Scripture is clear. What God resets cannot be corrupted again by the same means. When God restores, He does not do so partially or experimentally. His work is complete, intentional, and sealed. The reset was not emotional. It was authoritative. It was not based on your consistency, but on His sovereignty. This means the enemy cannot undo it. He can only try to distract you from living out of it. The corruption that once entered through trauma, fear, or deception has already been addressed at the root. What remains is maintenance, not battle. This is where guarding the mind and heart becomes essential, not through striving, but through awareness.
Transition seasons are vulnerable not because you are weak, but because you are open. You are shedding old patterns while learning new rhythms. In this space, discernment matters more than intensity. Not every thought deserves engagement. Not every emotion deserves interpretation. Scripture instructs you to guard your heart because it is now fertile ground. Seeds planted here, whether truth or doubt, will grow quickly. Protection is not isolation. It is filtration. Faith in this season is not effort. It is posture. It is the quiet refusal to rehearse accusations that God has already dismissed. Faith does not mean pretending you have no past. It means refusing to let the past narrate your future.
You are not called to defend the reset, explain it, or prove it. You are called to stand in it. Protection comes from agreement. When you agree with what God has done, the enemy loses access. Doubt only gains power when it finds permission. There may also be subtle external opposition. People who knew you before the reset, struggling to recognize you after it. Some will question your change, test your boundaries, or expect you to respond the way you used to. This is not persecution, it is adjustment. You are no longer compatible with certain dynamics, and incompatibility often feels like conflict at first. Guard your heart here as well. Do not over-explain your transformation. Peace does not require consensus. Stability does not require validation. Remember, transitions are bridges, not destinations. You are moving from reset into establishment. The enemy's goal is to exhaust you emotionally during the crossing, so that you arrive unsure instead of anchored. But faith stabilizes. Faith anchors. Faith protects by keeping your focus aligned with truth rather than noise. You are not fighting to keep what God restored. You are learning to live from it. And that learning process is protected by grace. What God has reset is irreversible. The work is done. The foundation is secure. Now your role is not to strain, but to stay aware. Not to battle, but to believe. Not to revisit what God healed, but to walk forward with confidence that the reset was real, complete, and divinely protected. Verbal declaration is introduced here not as a ritual, not as performance, and not as something meant to convince God of anything, but as an act of alignment. Speaking becomes the moment where the internal reset meets conscious agreement. Until now, much of what has happened has taken place beneath awareness. Shifts in perception, quiet changes in desire, subtle rearrangements of identity and peace. Declaration is how the listener steps into cooperation with what has already been initiated. It is not about creating reality, but about consenting to it. Scripture consistently shows that alignment follows agreement, and agreement is often expressed through speech. Not because words are magical, but because language reveals what the heart has decided to trust. The listener is led into receiving each reset intentionally, one layer at a time, because restoration is not absorbed through passivity, it is received. There is a difference between something being available and something being integrated. Declaration slows the moment down long enough for ownership to take place. When the listener speaks what God has already spoken, it closes the gap between promise and posture. This is why confession in Scripture is never framed as begging or bargaining, but as acknowledgement. To declare is to say, I recognize what has been done, and I choose to live in agreement with it. Speaking here is framed as confirmation, not performance. There is no audience to impress, no volume to reach, no emotion to manufacture. Quiet agreement carries the same authority as loud proclamation when it is rooted in truth. Performance tries to produce outcome through intensity. Confirmation simply affirms what already exists.
the listener is reminded that God is not persuaded by tone, repetition, or urgency. He responds to alignment. When words reflect truth, they become anchors. They stabilize the inner world so that external conditions can catch up without resistance. As declarations are spoken, the reset is declared sealed. Sealing implies finality, protection, and recognition. What is sealed is no longer vulnerable to casual interference. Scripture speaks of things being sealed in heaven, not hidden, but marked, authorized, and recorded. This language matters because it shifts the listener out of insecurity. The reset is not fragile. It is not experimental. It is not waiting on perfection to remain intact. It has been recorded, meaning it is acknowledged beyond the listener's emotional state. It has been enforced, meaning authority stands behind it regardless of opposition. Enforcement does not require effort from the listener. It requires agreement.